perpendicular to whatever trail, or in this case, drainage ditch. We're going to start from the drainage ditch here. Okay. And the primary reason for starting here is we want to avoid any human perturbation on the landscape. So for example, we don't want to include anything like this in our plots. There are other artifacts down there we would want to avoid. Yeah, like here. If you do lay down a plot according to the protocol that we're going to give you, and it ends up there's some sort of obvious human disturbance there, then you want to avoid that and put the plot a different place. And it doesn't really matter where you do it, just you have to make sure that you're not biasing it towards picking a particular type of burned area. But at any rate, you're going to walk off 10 paces. I lost count already. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Of your transect, and we're going to lay out a 100-meter transect, but we can just visualize it. We don't actually have to have a tape measure and measure 100 meters. But what we're going to do is along this, in other words, you just imagine a transect parallel to, in this case, the drainage ditch. And you're going to pace off 10 paces from this point here.
So that's your first stop here.
That's the beginning of the transect. Okay, so we're going to start the, okay, we'll start the plot here.
Okay. Yeah.
And this will be your first plot.
Yep.
So you'll put in a flag. I recommend you put it in as far as you can, simply to avoid people seeing it and wanting to rip it out of the ground, which I know from experience will happen. This will be the corner plot for your first 1 square meter plot. And it's going to mark off the southwest corner.
Now, let me just say, interrupt John for a second here. So the way what we're going to do is give each of you 4 pieces of PVC and 4 elbows. Now, normally with PVC, you glue them together. I think it would be more convenient not to glue them together. And then when you're done, you can just take it apart, put the elbows back in your bag, keep the bars separately. But it's just less. It's much less awkward than this big 1 square meter thing. And then when you come back out the next time, just pop it back together again, and away you go. So, but they are a little bit then fussy because they can fall apart. Okay.
The way we normally do this, we put down a flag, and we want to try to the best of our ability to go back to that same plot over time. And so we're going to lay this down in a way that we can come close to finding that original plot. And usually we put that flag as the corner post, and we need to come up with a standard. And this is totally arbitrary. You can come up with your own standard as long as you record it. But what we're going to be doing here is picking the northwest corner. That requires you to know directions. And that's going to be north, that's going to be west. Más o menos, I guess.
You have a compass here.
Okay.
A compass would be possible. But the thing is we just want to distinguish it from the northeast and the southeast and the southwest. And so we probably don't need a compass, although, if we wanted to be more precise, we would do that. And if you want to take a compass and do that, that's great. So we just lay this plot down at this point. And that is our first, and we want to try and make it as parallel to this line as possible. Maybe turn it a little like that. And that's our first plot. Now, in terms of the plants study, what we want to know is how severe the fire was at that plot. And so within the plot, we want to find a burned out shrub stump. Now this is one which was obviously very severe because everything was burned all the way to the ground. Unlike some of these others, you see skeletons sticking up. Less severe. And the calipers?
Calipers, just a moment. calipers have a little piece of tape or a little.
Yeah, at any rate, we can work on trying to put those together and
Batteries there. Let's just do this. So the battery pops in.
Are you measuring this stuff?
we're going to measure. We're going to do a measurement of fire severity, and I'll explain that just in 1 second.
Normally these aren't apart like this. I'm not sure why.
It's just a graph that's attracted everybody's attention. Yep. If he can actually put the calipers.
See if he can assemble the calipers.
Pardon me?
Between all
I
of
don't.
this,
Yes.
we're
But we
going
will. Eventually.
to make this little baby work. Just
I was guessing that it's harder.
the battery.
It could.
Okay. No, the battery's fine.
In fact, that's probably a good guess.
Hang on. Okay. It should go this way.
Dr. Keeley, quick question. With the rains that are coming and we're leaving our boards out, is there anything you want to tell us about how to handle that?
Yeah. How to handle.
Well, with the rains and the storms that could happen between now and 6 months, if our boards get washed out or if our area gets muddy or whatever, is there anything you want us to do for that?
These are for the insects, right? We'll let Brad talk to that.
That'll work with that. Okay.
Did it work?
Yes.
Yay.
We hope so. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. I think my finger is 11.8 millimeters. Okay. First thing you want to do in your plot, and this only needs to be done the first time you're out, and that is to measure a measurement of fire severity. And severity is related to intensity of fire, but intensity is an energy measurement. It's how much energy was generated per unit area by the fire. We have no way of getting intensity, but we can get the impact of that intensity on vegetation. We call that severity. And our measurement of severity is to find within the plot or as near to the plot as possible a stump of a burned out shrub, and then we find the smallest twig on that shrub and we measure its diameter. So in this case I would say maybe this is going to be the smallest. And so we would record 13.1 millimeters as the measure for severity on that plant.
Does everybody know how to use a caliper?
We can pass this around and let people
We can pass
try
this
it
around, let
for
people play with
themselves.
it. I mean, basically, you're going to have to put in that battery if it's not already in. It should be. You turn it on and off, and then you have to zero a caliper, and that just means you close it up. So that should read 0. And then you press, with it on, you press the 0 button, and that sets it, so that tells the digital caliper that that measurement is 0. And then from there, you just open it, and it tells you how wide the gap is.
Yeah, and I
that
think we
gap
should
on.
probably go over that on a few different shrubs,
I agree.
just to give an idea of the range of differences you'll see in severity and how we go about measuring those.
Why does that measurement tell you severity?
Well, there's been studies done where scientists have gone out into shrublands and they've put out sensors for determining the intensity of the fire, and then they've gone back and measured the diameter of the smallest twig, and they find a very strong correlation. So for example, if you look behind you, you see a burned out skeleton that's about a meter or so tall, and the smallest twig on there is far smaller than this, and so that's going to give you a different measure of severity, and that is logical, because if you see a skeleton standing a meter high after the fire, that does imply that the fire wasn't as severe at that site than someplace like this where it looks like it was very severe. Now, one of the things that will vary with respect to severity is the species of the shrub. Now, it is possible to identify the species of the shrub based on what's left on the skeleton. Now, to begin with, we won't necessarily expect everybody to do that, but I think over time, as you see different shrubs and you see them, many of them will resprout from the base and you'll be able to identify the species. You'll see that there's a particular wood pattern associated with each of these dead skeletons, and you actually can apply a name. We don't necessarily expect the first time out you're going to be able to do that, but you're going to be coming back once a month, and I think over time you might be able to pin down what the species is. But if not, we'll just live with what we get in that regard. But as we go along and look at different skeletons, I'll point out some of the characteristics that are sometimes associated with different dead shrubs.
Joey, you got a question?
Yeah, just can you address, so in some areas you'll have the most intense, hottest fire burning through there and you won't have a skeleton. Would that smallest twig then be 0 millimeters?
No, you would, because see, it's distinctly possible there were no shrubs there.
That was my second question.
And you're setting me up, I see. What you want to do is find the nearest skeleton to your plot, record how far away it is from the middle of the plot, and then measure that one. So if there were no skeletons there, this would be the next nearest one, and so we would find the smallest one on this one, which is probably that stem there, and just measure how far it is from the center of the plot. And that'll give us at least a good estimate of what the severity was in that particular area.
Thank you. You have a question behind you.
Question behind you?
Hi. So, what if we find a shrub like this? How would you measure severity?
You would measure it the same way, find
Oh,
the
just-
smallest twig, and the smallest twig is that.
Okay. Sweet. Thank you.
And that tells you, I mean, that's a really big number, 105, tells you it was really hot there. Yep. Hot enough to burn that all the way.
And you know, for me at least,
Yeah. This is
even
just more to
this
videos after the
makes
fact.
me kind of realize, you know, I mean, it sort of helps me visualize a little bit the fact that, you know, it wasn't quite as severe over there, where there's lots of sort of skinny little twigs sticking up, as it was right here. And even just that, I mean, it makes sense, it's kind of cool, it helps you kind of understand better and visualize better, you know, the patchiness of these fires and what it is we're trying to capture with it to some extent.
Yeah. And very often you'll find that the amount of recovery after the fire is related to the severity. So for example, you see that slope there is all green.
Yep.
Almost certainly it's because, but Marty probably knows for sure, I would assume it's because it was mostly grassland.
Oh, yeah. Any place you're looking where you see large expanses of bright green, it's non-native annual grasses and mustard.
And the
all
grasses,
weeds.
the grasses don't
The
burn.
native areas are where you've still got the soil showing through.
Yeah, the grasses don't burn with high intensity, and so the severity is very low over there, and that's why you have lots of grasses and other exotic species coming back, is because it was a low intensity fire.
Yeah.
For our sites, are we gonna have any access to like fire history? So like, let's say our site is an annual grass site. I'm sure like severity of fire like is very dependent on what that site was doing a decade ago, 2 decades ago.
And I think that will depend. I think for some we will, for some we won't. I think we'll figure that out after the fact. Right now, we're just going to be, you know, Marty's going to be putting together lists of potential sites. She's keeping some of that in mind, but we go forward without knowing that, which I think is better too. It keeps your mind a little clearer, a little potentially less biased.
And to answer your question, yes, we have fire history maps. Marty
Yeah.
will be able to generate those.
There'll be a lot of data that go along with these
So
plots.
you can see what the past history of fires, and their fire history database goes back
1925.
1925. So there's a lot of data out there on what has happened at that site in the past. Now, in general, Marty and I were talking about this, and we think that we're going to get the most consistent results if we stick to one vegetation type. So we're going to stick to shrublands, and we're going to avoid grassland like that there. So if you see an area that right now is all green, very likely that was a grassland. We're going to avoid that. And if you come to a site with trees, we're going to avoid oak woodland type areas. So we're going to stick with something that we presume was a shrubland, and we assume that just based on the skeletons that are left on the site. Now, you're going to have clipboards.
They are not going to have clipboards. What they're going to have is a data sheet that again will be emailed to you along with working out along with the details of all this protocol and your potential sites. You're welcome to print that and fill it in, or if you prefer to do it on a tablet or on your phone or laptop, that's up to you.
Okay.
We all, being traditionalists, always like paper, but that's up to you.
Okay. So it's possible to do this all electronically.
Yep.
If you do it with paper, you're going to want some backing.
Right. A clipboard,
a clipboard, a
piece of
notepad,
cardboard,
something to write on.
Yep.
Now, as Brad said, he's going to be sending out a data sheet.
Yep.
So you'll get an idea of the types of data you want to record. The things that we want to record in this plot is, one, we want to know how severe it was. Next, we want to know how it's recovering. And there are really two groups of species we're interested in. One are the shrubs, which are, it's evident by the woody stem there. And we want to know if they are resprouting. See, many of the shrubs here have evolved for tens of millions of years with fire, and they have evolved the ability to regenerate after a fire by sprouting from the base. So for example, it looks like this shrub here is starting to sprout up. And when these leaves get a little larger, you'll be able to see, and we'll show you some examples of ones with larger leaves. You'll see a very distinct leaf type, which is called sage. And one way you're going to ultimately be able to track down what the stump was, species-wise, is by seeing examples of things with the same bark characteristics as this that have resprouted, and you identify that resprout and you'll be able to know what that skeleton is. But that's something that with time will come. So you want to record the number of shrubs that were in the site, and the number that resprouted and the ones that didn't. Now in this plot it's easy. There's one shrub and it resprouted, and you can see it sprouted right there. And what you'll find is, first time you go out, you might find examples of ones that don't resprout. Next time you go out, it might resprout. So you want to record it either as a resprout or no resprout shrub. And so you'll just record this, and first off you'll take a look at the leaf there, and we'll want to give it a name. And the names can be whatever makes sense to you. So, for example, this has kind of wrinkly leaves, so you can call that a wrinkle leaf shrub. Put that down on your card. And then eventually you'll bring those cards back to us. Here's a card.
So why don't you explain how the cards work?
Okay. When you first go out to the field, for many of you, although I think some of you do already know a lot of the plants, you're not going to know anything. That's not a problem. I've taught many field classes with students that didn't know anything when they went out. And what we have them do is we have them collect an example of what it is they see in the plot. But you don't want to collect it from the plot because you don't want to disturb the plot. So you want to go out away from the plot and find an example of something that looks like it. And if you looked at that resprout right there real closely, you would see that it looks a lot like this. And so you want to collect a piece of that. And another way you can identify it is by smell. Sage has a very distinctive sage smell. And if you were to squeeze one of those leaves, you'd see they have the very same smell. So there are a lot of things you can use to identify species. To begin with, though, you're not going to know. And so you're going to grab a piece, then you're going to ask your assistant to tape it on the card. And you probably want to tape the whole thing down just so you don't lose it. He's new at this thing.
Yes, you want a good assistant, not a lame assistant.
Okay, so you got this thing taped down, and you looked at that and you called it wrinkle leaf shrub. You want to write that down on here. The plot, or it doesn't have to be the plot number, just the name that you're giving that specimen there, wrinkle leaf shrub. And then eventually you'll bring these to Marty and myself and we'll identify them. Then you'll have the scientific name to go with those shrubs. And so that's the first thing you want to do is make a card for each of the species in the plot. Now, the next thing, we only have one shrub here, and so that's all we have to do with the shrubs. Then we have these herbaceous plants. And you want to look real closely at them to see if there are any that are different. And there's this one that seems to be quite common. And what does it look like?
Clover.
Looks like clover. Okay, we can call that clover. And in these sites, you'll probably find there's more than one clover species. So if you call this clover, and then you come to another one that looks like a clover, but it's different, just call it clover number 2. And then collect it, put it on a separate card, like my assistant there did. And so now you have, your herbarium is starting to grow. And then you gotta get down on your hands and knees and look real carefully because there are other things. Now, here's something here that has wrinkly leaves, just like this resprouting shrub. This is actually a seedling from this shrub here. This is a salvia seedling. And so you want to record that separately as a seedling, wrinkle leaf seedling. So we now, in this plot here, we have wrinkle leaf resprout and wrinkle leaf seedling. And we want to